Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Old Dog, written by PerilousPlatypus. General Hal Cranach was an old dog. Now, the sensible thing was to let him lie. Only thing he ever asked was to be left alone, and it seemed like the sort of thing ought to honor, given the history of the man in question. Hell, the Federation had taken the trouble to cordon off a whole world for Cranny, just to make sure that he wasn't bothered. As far as I'm concerned, it was the least that we could do, given all he'd done for us. The choice of world was a bit suspect. I didn't see no good that could come out of having a man slumbering amidst the graves of the fallen, but I wasn't about to second-guess them. If he wanted to gnaw bones while memories gnawed on him, so be it. Point being is that Cranny was off the board. But war has a way of causing good people to make some bad decisions. You get feeling the weight of it pressing down on, and all of a sudden the scales start tipping the other way. Like, maybe it's a good idea to dust off an old general, crack open the quarantine, shuttle on down to his little hidey hole, and ask him real nice to put the stars on one more time. I get it. I don't want to lose the war either. But I also don't want to be the one who's got to take the shuttle and make that request. I figure we got to have enough brains in the joint to come up with some solutions to our problems without taking the peace from the man who spent his whole life finding it. But maybe I'm just a sentimental sort. Guess the reasons don't matter now. I'm under orders and underway. They got me on one of them sleek slip ships. I can barely feel the phases as we bounce from point to point. It's a far cry from the mech barges Cranny and I came up in. Half the transport time was spent hosing down the floors of the dorms on account of all the wishing and washing along the way. I could almost get used to the idea of floating around in a tin can didn't send my skin sideways. That was the ship's captain. Things always got confusing when the branches mixed. Walking, I replied. Bones creaking and joints popping, I levered myself out of my bunk. I took a gander in the mirror, and then took a moment to straighten the black tunic and ran a few fingers through the thinning hair. Gotta send an old dog to talk to an old dog, I grumbled. The walk to the bridge was short. The slippers were small ships. I tapped a thumb against the panel, and the door slid open, revealing a small room beyond. Half the bridge crew were in dunk tanks, plugged in and managing the ship. A bunch of the new line mechs were using the same setup, something that sent skitters up my spine. I'd be damned if I was going to go sloshing around rather than strapping in proper. Engineers gotta ruin everything. Captain Leva Thrass was sitting in her chair, back as straight as the stick in her ass. I gave her a salute, and then she gave me a nod. Much as I hated dealing with the boat crew, Leva was all right. She'd been running black corridors behind the lines for the past few years, getting us info we needed to have and saving folks we all thought were lost. Babysitting me on this little trip counted as rest and relaxation as far as she was concerned. "Are a few seconds out," she said, nodding towards the countdown on the screen. I drew in a long, steady breath and then let it slide as the timer hit 0. There was a little shift, smooth as you please, as we landed in system. My stomach stayed right where it was supposed to be. The ship, on the other hand, got to a commotion as warning bells started to ring out. "This is a quarantine system. Unauthorized access will result in blah, blah, blah." It was all very serious, and I appreciated the extent to which they bothered to make sure Cranny kept his peace. There was a bit of back and forth with the locals as they checked in, but we made it through quick enough. Thrass fired up the in-system engines, and I took a seat in the mate's chair beside her. She cast a sidelong glance in my direction. "You prepared?" "Well, as much as I'm going to be." Even if Cranny was open to visitors, I wasn't looking forward to revisiting the place he'd made his home. Been a while since I got out this way. I caught her small nod in the periphery of my vision. She knew then. No surprises there. "You ever been on a war world?" I asked, my eyes trained on the view screen ahead. "Once. That was enough," she replied. More than enough." "Any thoughts on why General Cranach chose this place?" she asked. "It's where most of his friends are." The shuttle was bumpy. Not mech injection bumpy, but enough to make it miserable. Like most war worlds, the atmosphere was all storms and currents. It had been a century or two before it had truly settled down, unless they got some planters down there to start terraforming the place. After getting tossed around like a rag doll, we burst through the clouds, and I could get a look at the world below. It was all wreck and ruin, brown mud and grey metal. Great gashes cleaved through mountains and filled in with rushing water. Cleaved hulks of downed ships and Titan-class mechs laying in pieces in craters. More than a few hives as well. We'd broken their back here. Snapped it a quick second before they could snap ours. Thras was at the helm, a bit below her pay grade, but she seemed to be enjoying the sport. The radar pulsed and showed our progress towards the beacon. After a few more dips, dodges, and weaves, we came over a rise and saw Cranny's spot. He made a home out of a husk of one of the Titans, holed up in the chest cavity. It made sense. There were few places that would feel more like home to him. The shuttle sat down beside the ramp that looked like it had been tended to. Cranny liked a bit of order in these surroundings, said it made sense to control the environment when you had the opportunity to, seeing, as most often than not, you'd be taking it as it came. Clever way to say to keep your room clean, but that was Cranny, wasn't it? Clever. The back of the shuttle hissed just as soon as I got my suit locked. Rad readings weren't off the charts, but I assumed the whole planet reeked of the hell it had been put through. Thras stayed behind, which was awful nice of her. I didn't expect Cranny to be particularly interested in any faces, let alone new ones. I stomped up the ramp and gave the door a proper knock. It was one of those old side hatches for evacs when the ejection unit got fired. I always viewed them more of a cosmetics than anything else. If the crew housing the Titan was up the creek, then there wasn't much chance of crawling your way out. After a few attempts, I had some extra time for politeness. I turned the wheel and yanked the hatch open. The other side was a narrow crawl tube, dimly lit by the runner lights. "I'm too old for this," I said and knelt down. "So is he." The tube was merciful in its shortness, though there was a ladder on the other side. I made it up with a few huffs and puffs and then came to a narrow hallway leading towards the crew quarters. Granny was there, leaning up against the wall and giving me the stink eye. "You're in the wrong place, Gaz," he said, his voice all gravel and gruff. I gave him an innocent shrug and a helpless smile, but he ain't buying what I'm studying. "I know, Granny. I know." "You lost." I gave him a shake of the head. He gives me a long, hard stare. I just sit there, knowing this ain't the time to make any moves. Granny is going to make a call right here and now, and nothing I can say or do is going to change it. He knows there's only one reason for me to be here. Only after he's peeled back the layers and peered into my soul does he turn and begin trudging down the hallway. I stand straight where I was until he raises a hand and gives me the flick of the fingers. "All right, come on then. I've got supper on." I follow him through the few twists and turns in silence. Once we made our way to the mess, I get an eye of supper. It's the nutrient paste they packed in the mechs in case the crew gets stranded. It's a hellish concoction that's qualified as cruel and unusual if we fed it to prisoners. I take a gander at the crew and then give Cranny a raised brow. "You get used to it." He takes a seat and gestures towards the seat the opposite. I took mine and accepted a bowl, making an effort to stir it around a bit while Cranny took a spoonful of his. He slurped it up and gave me another measuring look. I returned it as best I could, but I'd learned long ago that there wasn't much room for victory when it came to one of those looks. I let my eyes wander around the place, such as it was. There wasn't much to it. Tables, chairs, and polished panel cabinets. Hard to occupy myself too much, but I made every attempt to study before my eyes went back to his. I was pretty sure Cranny hadn't bothered to blink. "What do they want?" he asked. I shrugged. It was answer enough. "I see." He took another spoon and paste. "Bad, then?" "Not good." I let pause past. "Salvageable." Another spoonful. "The bench?" I grimaced now. He was always going to ask it, and it was always going to be painful in delivering it. "Then there's some sharps up and coming, to be sure, but we've been hollowed out." I give the gruel a bit of a stir, trying to find my footing in the next words. "We've lost First Fleet." That got Cranny's attention. He leaned forward, sour breath on my face. "Say that again." "It's gone." There's no brave face to put on. The first was our pride, our beating heart, the tip of the spear and the whole bit of the shaft. It was also personal to us. We'd shipped with the first. They might have been piss-poor jumpers putting our stomachs on the floor every transport, but they were our piss-poor jumpers. They were the ones who created us, fired us, and picked us up after. "There must be a story," Cranny said. "Less than you might think. They went out, not many of them came back. Hivers found some new friends, something we hadn't seen before. They were on the first before the engines could reset," I said, telling him what I'd been told. It stank to high heaven, but it was all I had. Cranny frowned. He sniffed too. "Where?" "Outer quad, 14 deep." His frown deepened. "We pushed the boundary that far." I gave him a long, slow shake now. Put my whole neck into it. "Boundary sits at 9. Granny's knuckles turned white around the spoon, and he jabs the head of it in my direction. "They sent the first 5 past." "So they say." He pauses now, giving me a long look of his own. "You have thoughts?" "More like a feeling. All dark and cloudy." Granny had learned to trust those feelings. I wasn't no seer, but I could taste the winds. "I'm here, because they say there's going to be another war world. Maybe a few of them. Plan is to blast and cap systems all the way out to 14. It had been a long while since there'd been a war world. I'd like to say that we'd learned the lessons that needed learning from them, but too much of the old blood had gone, and the lessons needed learning again. Fingers began drumming on the table as I let him know the worst of it. "What's the ask?" Back in the chair. "With 21st Spear, 2nd and 4th Army, flying with the 3rd Fleet," I said. "What's in the spear?" "Last I heard, Titans and Behemoths, Wraiths, supplements." Cranny was nodding to that, the fingers still drumming. "Something is off. Sending the first out like that, no information on the Hiver's new ally?" "Whatever there is ain't made it to my desk. You're going to have to do the asking yourself." "Fair enough." He pushed himself out of his chair. "I'll gather my effects." End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps. Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.